I would like to warmly welcome our presenter of today, Barbara Brownie. You all know Barbara, but we actually met just before Moonbound was conceived, and she became one of the key people to shape the entire project. Barbara contributed to the conceptual development of the project, as well as co-edited the miniature book, helping bring together this remarkable collective of artists, writers, scientists, and researchers around the question, how does the moon see the Earth? Barbara is an associate dean at the Royal College of Art, where she co-leads the space research group. Her work explores the space as a site for creative practice, with a particular focus on effects of microgravity on art and design. She is also the author of Spacewear, Weightlessness, and the Final Frontier of Fashion from 2019, and most recent Air in Orbit, Air Objects and Spaceflight 2025. So please join me in welcoming Barbara.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Right, can everybody see that? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I've done a lot of talking about the whole book and the question, how does the moon see the Earth? And so I think this is the first time that I've really spoken about the piece of work that I had in the book. And it's called Earth Sightseeing Itinerary for the Moon. And it brings together some of the things I've been looking at elsewhere for my other work and research. So I've got a spread, and it's basically a two-page spread, but it's the same text in a lunar language and in my own language, English, on the right. The starting point for this was the various operations data files and instructions that astronauts receive when they are in space. This is a glove of one of the Apollo astronauts, and you can see on the cuff there are a set of instructions. This is a kind of step by step. These are the things that you need to remember to do, and that's necessary because the astronauts might be a little bit awestruck, or dealing with adrenaline or other emotions when they're on the moon, and maybe they need a reminder of all the things that they should be doing. But more broadly, it reflects how all astronauts' time when they are in space is just minute by minute, second by second, dictated to them exactly what they need to be doing. It's so controlled by NASA. So being an astronaut means follow instructions all the time, every waking hour. So it kind of becomes their life when they're up in space, is just following instructions. So I've been quite fascinated um, by how that is the life of an astronaut, following instructions. And if we look at some of the artworks that have been sent into space by artists, because artists can't accompany their works into space, those have been deployed, constructed by astronauts. And so this whole following of instructions applies in the art sector as well. And in both of these examples that you can see on the screen here, conversations had to happen between astronauts and artists before they went up to rehearse the process of deploying the artwork. And then obviously also written instructions, step by step, cut this piece, attach this piece to that bit, very step by step, granular detail. This is how you create or deploy the artwork once it's in space. So there's all sorts of questions there about who the artist is, what's the astronaut's role in that, and to what extent can we credit the astronaut with making, creating, what is this kind of collaboration, and where is the responsibility for making the artwork? Conceptually, is this the work of the artist? And where is the art in that? Is the art in the instructions and the giving of the instructions, the bit that the artist has created, or is the astronaut creating the artwork by physically constructing it according to the artist's instructions? So I'm quite fascinated by how deployment of artwork by astronauts reopen some of these questions about where the art is, where the and where who the artist is. And that takes me back to event scores, which is something that started to really um, happen quite a lot in the art world in the 1960s. And these are basically artworks that are scores for events or activities, performances. They are instructions for somebody to perform the artwork. And sometimes these were performed by the artist, sometimes they were performed by a performer, by a third party, but also could be performed by anybody. So an event score is created by an artist. Anybody can perform that that score and make art themselves. And Yoko Ono, I'm particularly interested in her event scores, and I thought this is the most pertinent of Yoko Ono's scores, Earth Piece. Listen to the sound of the earth turning. Um, and and that's an instruction to do something that can be quite a profound experience, to just kind of sit there and imagine the sound of the earth turning beneath you. So there's some really nice, quite poetic scores out there, but they're all instructions. And having looked at all these astronauts' instructions and then also being very familiar with Yoko Ono's work and event scores, I can't help but see that connection between those and see the potential for space art to be event scores, particularly in an environment where it's so expensive to get actual objects up into space. There's so much more potential for something that doesn't require physical objects that come up into space. So we maybe might find more potential or more options, more opportunities to create stuff in space if it is a subject of an event score or if it's performance or if it's just instructions to an astronaut to do something rather than actually a physical object. So I am quite interested in the new potential that we have for space art if we kind of focus on these opportunities to work with event scores. Um, so so hence I wrote an event score, an Earth sightseeing itinerary for the moon. And so I interpreted this question, how does the moon see the Earth, quite literally, and imagined the moon seeing the Earth, coming to the Earth, and seeing the Earth, what they might do. So it's a kind of day by day. This is what you might do on these days: fall to Earth, sightsee, observe humans, all the things that somebody might do when coming to the Earth. And I have tried to include in that list of instructions the kind of thing that astronauts do when they go to the moon, so collecting samples and things like that. But then there's also a poetic element to it as well. So day 5 includes correct folklore as an activity. So that imagines an environment in which this lunar visitor would track down all the poems, all the myths, all the stories that are inaccurate about the moon and what it might be, and try and kind of revise all of that. So there's that kind of cultural element aspects to it as well, which I wanted to get in there too. And I wrote it in English, which is my native language, but I know that's not the language that the moon would use because the moon is not human. The moon is something else. And so again, I was thinking about how we have invited people to contribute in every language, and although English is my native language, I'm artificially imposing that on the moon in this case. And we have all been contributing stuff in Earth languages. So if we're thinking in this post-terrestrial way, I also wanted to think a little bit about alien languages or lunar languages and the language that the moon might use. So I started to think about language for the moon, and felt that it'd be better to obviously it would be better represented as coming from the moon if this wasn't in English. And so you can see actually in the page of the book on the left there, I've got the lunar language version of this. And this, I must stress, isn't an actual language that I have developed. It is asemic, and I think that was quite important for me. So asemic writing is something that I investigated quite a lot during my PhD. I did a PhD in typography some years ago, And part of that involved looking into pseudo-writing and asemic signs. And this is a more contemporary example of asemic writing. It's a book from Sky by Zhu Bing. This is a piece of artwork that looks like it's written in a real language, but actually is entirely inaccessible. It's just pseudo-writing. Um, it looks vaguely Chinese if you don't know Chinese, but if you do, then you can tell that it's not actually real writing. Um, and there's kind of historic background to pseudo writing. It's been around for centuries and centuries. Sometimes there's ornamentation. There's a lot of really interesting stories historically about particular examples of pseudo writing. Sometimes it was used in pottery, quite often in physical objects, um, particularly in environments where writing and literacy is associated with the elite, with the educated, and it's not accessible to a lot of people. So what you get historically is a lot of craftspeople creating stuff that looks like writing, but actually isn't, because they're illiterate. And often their audiences are illiterate as well. Their customers are illiterate. So they're using stuff that looks like writing in order to elevate um, the the ceramics or the object to a kind of higher level, but it's all fake. I mean, it's pseudo writing, um, and and this particular example is quite interesting. This is some forgeries known as the Shadwell forgeries. This was a pair of forgers who would claim that they were digging up medieval things from the banks of the Thames and made a lot of money selling them. But they weren't actually, what they were actually doing is making stuff themselves and passing it off as real medieval trinkets and treasures. But they were illiterate, so they had no idea how to write. And so where you got on the edge is stuff that looks like writing, and they were really just pretending. They had no idea what they were doing, but it gives the impression of writing. It's got the characteristics of writing. It's, linearly arranged. There's all these glyphs that are about the same size. Um, and so pseudo writing has this really interesting history of um, across all sorts of cultures in many different ways. So with that, I find fascinating. And then examples in all sorts of places, illustration and stuff. Um, and it's always used more recently when we have a more literate society as something that is consciously inaccessible, knowingly inaccessible. And it's meaningless is what is significant. So it connotes writing, but also consciously frustrates the reader. So it presents itself as writing, but you know you're not supposed to be able to read it. So you are othered and it is othered, and there's othering happening in both directions. Um, and sometimes it has these kind of associations with sorcery and magical symbols, and like it hints at this hidden meaning that is somehow forbidden, forbidden knowledge that can only be accessed by people who are other and not you. Um, and so it's always intended as slightly othering like that. And so for that reason, we also use it when we are depicting the other strange, cultures that we're not supposed to understand, that are not supposed to be accessible to any reader. This is an amazing example of a book called The Arrival by Sean Tan, which I highly recommend to everybody. It's a picture book with no English words in it, but it does have in the illustrations these various kind of symbols that are supposed to be this language. It's a story of an immigrant, and of course the immigrant can't understand the language, and so you as a reader are in that same place when you can't understand the language either. So you kind of have to empathize with the subject of this book, who is an immigrant, because you also can't understand the language. And so when we go to the moon, we will be foreign, we will be other, we will be immigrants. And so if the moon had a language, it would be inaccessible to us. It would be always strange and alien. And so therefore it was really important to me that we couldn't translate this lunar language that I'm using. Um, and so it's in the same category as xenolinguistics, which is kind of alien language, and you get these in films and sci-fi sometimes. And these examples of xenolinguistics often are just asemic signs, like glyphs that don't have any real meaning. Sometimes they do. Sometimes people write alphabets, which is kind of a bit of a cheat because it's not the same as other scripts aren't just translations of the Arabic alphabet, but that sometimes that works that way. Sometimes they are just completely abstract asemic glyphs that are just designed to look like writing. And then sometimes retrospectively, audiences impose meaning on them, and that meaning emerges as part of this kind of bigger fanhood or franchise, and it becomes retrospectively imposed. Um, but it always has a terrestrial feel to it because necessarily it still has to come across as writing. So in order for us to understand that it is writing, it has to have some of those familiar elements to human writing, like being arranged linearly or having, separate glyphs that are all around about the same size. So it has to strike this balance between familiar and other, and it has some aspects of human writing, but also some aspects of strangeness that we can't quite decipher. Um, so so that's what I've got on the left-hand page there. I've got symbols that I felt were quite lunar. There's a lot of circles in there, thinking in terms of the moon, maybe thinking quite orbital. Um, and we know that each of these rows is a day, so maybe the moon might conceive of a day as an orbital thing. So you've got lots of circles in that language. But other than that, this is very quite consciously not decipherable. It is this othering language, and we are supposed to feel that it is alien. Um, and that is my whole presentation because I wanted to leave us time to discuss. So thank you very much.